Hi there. We're looking at a series now where we go through some single verses which make important points that you need to think about if you're going to understand the Bible. And in this session, we're looking at John chapter 4, verse 22, and it's one of many passages where Jesus shows that he is not God. So if you take the time to subscribe, to press the like button and the notify button, off we go, and we'll take a look at this passage. So let's think about the context first of all. Any text without a context is just a pretext. So let's think what's happening. And what's happening is that Jesus has gone into Samaria and he stops by a well, and there he starts off a conversation with a Samaritan woman. Now, the important thing about Samaritans is that the Samaritans and the Jews, not just that they didn't see eye to eye, they really didn't like one another. And the Samaritans didn't agree on all sorts of things with what the Jewish people were teaching at the time. For example, the Jews had a temple in Jerusalem, and they said the temple of God must be in Jerusalem, whereas the Samaritans said, no, the temple of God must be on Mount Gerizim, and they had built their own temple there. Another point, which bit of the scripture you accept, the Samaritan would say only the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament are scripture. The Jews said, no, there have been prophets since that time, and those prophets have produced books. So there were all sorts of differences between Jews and Samaritans. Anyway, Jesus starts to talk to the Samaritan woman, and the Samaritan woman replies, and the conversation carries on. And the woman in particular is raising issues that divide Samaritans from Jews. And she's saying, Jews say this, and the Samaritans say that. Keeps on saying it. She's asking Jesus about it. And Jesus gives a more general answer to this in verses 21 to 24 of John chapter 4. And among this, we have John 4, verse 22. And this is the verse that we're going to look at now. And here it is. Jesus says, you worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. And people read John chapter 4 over and over again, and they read right past this verse. They don't stop to think what this verse is saying. And there are 3 points that come from this particular verse. First of all, he says, we worship what we know. So he's saying the Jews know God. They know what God's like. Now, if you've been in a conversation about the Trinity, if you've asked a Trinitarian to tell you what the Trinity is like, to describe it or to define it, then sooner or later you come across some kind of contradiction in the description, and the Trinitarian says, yes, it's a mystery. You can't understand God. You can't know what God's like. Well, what Jesus is saying here is that the Jews know Jesus. The Jews don't think God is a mystery. They say God is one person, and the Jews can know God. So that's the first point. God can be known. The idea that God is a mystery and you can't know God is simply wrong. He goes on to say that salvation is from the Jews. We worship what we know, for salvation is the Jews. So the Jews know God. So he's saying that the Jews' understanding of God is correct. Now, Jesus is speaking towards the end of the Second Temple period in Judaism. And at this point, above all, the Jews are radical monotheists. They are determined there is one God, no other God exists. This one God is one person. God is one in every possible way. And Jesus says that the Jewish understanding of God is correct. And the Jews had never believed in a Trinity, not at any point in their entire history, but certainly at this point, they very definitely did not believe in anything that resembled the doctrine of the Trinity. They believed in one God who was one person. They were unitary monotheists all the way through. And there's a third point. Jesus says we worship. He includes himself in worshipping God. So Jesus worships God. Now, God, of course, doesn't worship anybody. God worships no one at all. But Jesus worships God. So if Jesus worships God, Jesus is not the greatest being. Jesus is not himself God. So we've seen 3 points where that passage doesn't fit with the doctrine of the Trinity. In fact, it opposes it completely. We saw that the doctrine of the Trinity is a mystery, but Jesus says God is not a mystery. And Jesus endorses the radical monotheism of Second Temple Judaism. He says that the Jews of that day are correct, and the Jews of that day believed in one God who was one person. And finally, Jesus tells us that he worships the same God as the Jews. Jesus worships the one God who is one person, and Jesus worships him. God, of course, worships no one. There is no one for God to worship. There is no one greater than God. And so Jesus is telling us that there is one God and he is not that God. Now, your church might not agree with that. The question you have to ask yourself is, what are you going to believe? Are you going to believe Jesus, or are you going to believe your church? Can you believe Jesus? Well, I hope you can, because Jesus is the person right at the middle of Christianity. So, this is only part of a whole series of videos that we're producing on Gospel Online. If you go to our website, you'll find more videos. If you go onto this channel, you see more videos. If you subscribe and press the notify, you'll find out as more videos come up. So, get going, press the like button, tell us what you think of the video, put some comments in if you like, and may God bless you always.